Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for being here. I realize it's early in the morning, so the crowd may be a little bit small for today. But if anyone watching the VOD back, appreciate you being here as well. Just figured I wanted to do this video. I thought about doing this in a regular video instead of a live stream, but I thought maybe if folks hop in, potentially it could be a little bit interactive. Also, it makes it a little bit simpler to just kind of give all of my thoughts as opposed to having to like condense a video and things like that. So figured I'd do a live stream a little bit different than what we've done in the past. We've obviously done mostly things with games like Slay the Spire and Halo, in which we talked about other topics as well. So we'll obviously do that again in the future. But I figured for today, let's keep it to content revolved around a certain topic. And this one today being TV shows. So favorite TV shows of all time. And let me throw on. Hopefully everything's good with the audio and stuff. This is my first time doing a scheduled live stream, but it worked out mostly the same. I had to click go live instead, so a little bit different. So I was a little bit late by a couple minutes, but let me throw up some copyright free music in the background too. It may wind up looping, but let me pop that open and hopefully you guys have some extra noise going on outside of just me blabbering. So if anyone hops in, let me know if the audio needs to be adjusted, but hopefully that's a good level to be at. But so yeah, I figured why not do a TV show top 10 for me. I put a poll out, I think sometime last week, just asking people's opinions whether they wanted TV shows, movies, games, or music, like albums. And it's something I'll probably cover all of those sometime in the future, but I figured why not get people's preferences, at least starting things off. And there wasn't a whole lot of feedback, but movies and TV shows were tied, but I believe TV shows was placed higher earlier. So I figured, okay, we'll start off with TV shows, and maybe in the future we'll do movies and games and something with music as well. So for the sake of today, we'll be covering TV shows. So appreciate anyone giving feedback as far as that being a topic they wanted to discuss. And I don't know how long we're gonna go. It may depend on if people hop in chat or not, and just how long I kind of ramble on about the shows I discuss here, because I don't have necessarily like a long list of stuff to necessarily cover, other than just kind of shooting from the hip when it comes to the shows I do enjoy and just a few maybe points about them. So other than that, hopefully everyone's having a good Friday. A little rough start for me, but trying to make the most of it. So I hope you're having a great day, and we'll kind of just jump into things here. And as I said, if anyone hops in, definitely open to hearing anyone else's kind of top 10 alongside mine. And if you're watching this back on the VOD, open to having you comment your own personal top 10 list and just kind of discussing further there. Always fun just seeing different opinions. And yeah, we'll go from there. So I will give a few caveats before jumping into the actual list of stuff. So a few things to keep in mind. And I feel like doing lists like this in general are a little bit harder than doing like rankings. Obviously, both you're kind of having to relay your opinion, but I feel like rankings, you kind of have a limited population that you're pulling from. Whereas your top shows all time, it's like every show that exists. So a little bit more challenging to actually have like a definitive list, I'll say. So a few caveats, as I was saying. First one being, I obviously haven't seen every TV show. That should be probably pretty obvious, but it's very possible one of your favorite TV shows I haven't seen, and that may impact whether or not I would actually look to include it in the future. This is also just a moment in time, so this is subject to change as time goes on. Second caveat I'll say is that I may have forgotten a show that I would potentially include that I really like, that I just forgot to include because it's not something I, off the top of my head considered. So I haven't seen everything. Even the stuff I've seen, there's a potential. I'm like, oh yeah, that would have been a good one. So realize that as well. Then finally, this is obviously just my opinion as far as what's my favorites. It's not an objective list or even trying to name the highest quality shows. If I was trying to do that, I would probably name, a lot of the ones you'll see on people's like top 10 shows of all time. I'm going to give some honorable mentions, and I'll mention there a few of the ones that I feel like probably meet the criteria of like highest quality, even though they're not necessarily my favorite. So that's kind of a weird delineation I make sometimes, where it's like, this is the best, but this is what I like the most. And there's not always like the same on both lists. Sometimes you really like something that's not necessarily highly praised or has the highest quality. So keep that in mind. It also won't fully aligned to your own personal list, obviously, but as I mentioned, I encourage you to share your list as we go along here if you're in the live chat or afterwards in the comment section. So other than that, yeah, that's about it. As I mentioned, would love to see your feedback there. Even if it's not a show I like or have seen, it's always cool to see people with different opinions as far as what they enjoy, and opinions can change over time as well. So keeping all of that in mind, I'll say. So jumping into some honorable mentions, I'll just kind of jump right into the topic here then. I kind of have a lengthy list here. I had it a little bit longer, but then I whittled it down because I was like, oh, would I really consider that? I don't think so. So I have somewhat of a lengthy, my honorable mentions honestly is longer than my actual list. So we'll go through those and I'll try not to spend too much time on them. But the first one being, this is one I don't think a lot of people would actually consider it, but it's one I seriously considered. It fits the category of probably something I really like, but not necessarily something that I would view as like the best quality. But it's American Vandal. If you've seen that, it's a Netflix show. It stars like Jimmy Tatro, and he's in season 1, I guess. In season 2, he's not in. So there's 2 seasons of the show, but it's pretty much a mockumentary. So if you like documentary stuff, but also like parodies, it's kind of perfect for that. Where you have this high school, and there's been like pranks played in both seasons. The first one, as I mentioned, is with Jimmy Tatro, and I don't know with YouTube live streams as far as language and stuff. I think we're far enough in the live stream may not matter, but someone pretty much drew phallic-shaped objects on all of the cars in the parking lot, and you have to find out who did it. And they're actually like taking it really seriously, like it would be with a documentary, with like a web of different clues and stuff. So it's pretty funny, and it actually does a pretty good job at being a documentary as well. The second season's also pretty strong. It's probably not as good as the first, in my opinion, but I still enjoyed it. It's like dealing with somebody playing a prank with like laxatives and stuff like that. So kind of a good comedy. Just you throw it on there, you're gonna have a good time with it, I'll say. Next one in the honorable mentions that I included was Midnight Gospel, another thing that's on Netflix. It's made by Duncan Trussell. I've only watched it one time. There's actually only 1 season of it, so it's pretty brief, but it was a pretty good, just both like visual and discussion. It's almost like a podcast type of setup, but there's like actually a story on the screen where you have this character going through like different parts of the universe, and he's exploring like questions of like life and death and things like that. I think Duncan Trussell actually like interviewed people with different topics, and he just kind of threw that on top of this animation that kind of works alongside the discussion that they're having. So it's kind of weird where it's both like serious tone as far as topics, but then has these like very trippy visuals as well. And the last episode especially is pretty deep. It's an interview with him and his mom. So one worth checking out. It's not super long, so it's pretty easy just to get through really quickly. Next on honorable mentions, I had Invincible. This is probably in the category of, it's not necessarily best for me, but I could see it being viewed as pretty high quality and have a place on some people's list as far as the best. Pretty much the plot here is you have your main character, Mark Grayson, who is like living in high school, and he's kind of discovering his powers as a superhero. And his dad is Omni-Man, which is this like very established hero played by J.K. Simmons. Stephen Yeun is the guy who plays Mark Grayson as well. He's pretty famous. He's in a few other shows as well. I think he's in like The Walking Dead, stuff like that. But J.K. Simmons is Omni-Man. Seth Rogen's also kind of randomly in it as another alien. I will caveat here, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning, I don't feel like you have to see every season of a show to necessarily view it as something you really enjoy. But I'll mention as we go along if I've seen, how much of the show. Obviously, the first 2, American Vandal, Midnight Gospel, I've seen all of those because there's only 2 seasons and 1 season. Invincible, I've only watched season 1. I don't typically have Prime, so I'm not necessarily accessing it all the time. But I did watch season 1 a while ago and really enjoyed it. It's kind of your superhero type vibe. It's animated, obviously, but I feel like the story is pretty strong, and especially within the first season, as I mentioned, that's the only one I've actually watched. A lot of crazy stuff happens. Like even in that first episode, there's a big twist that kind of happens at the end of the first episode where it's not your typical superhero type of story. It's also based off of some books too, so that's a way to digest it if you're interested in Invincible and trying to like get through it faster, maybe. So another one to consider. Also on the honorable mentions, we have Banshee. So this is one I watched like a year ago. It's got Anthony Starr in it. He plays this character named Hood, and he's pretty much fresh out of prison, and he goes to this town, and he winds up taking on this sheriff's identity. And it kind of reminds me a little bit, if you've seen the movie Blue Streak with Martin Lawrence, where he gets out of prison, he tries to like go back and he pretends to be a cop. It's kind of similar vibes to that. Maybe a little bit less comedy. It's kind of Blue Streak meets Breaking Bad, I'll say, because it has a serious tone, but it's kind of playing that role of, you know, a former convict playing on the law enforcement side and getting kind of in that gray area of like, okay, which side am I actually on now? But it's pretty solid. I think it's a good show in that it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's only, I think, 4 seasons, so it's pretty quick to get through. And some of the later seasons or like episodes maybe start to dip a little bit, but I think it ends quick enough that it doesn't overstay its welcome too much. So worth checking out if you haven't heard of it. It's kind of an under the radar show, I'll say, for a lot of people. Breaking Bad is the next one. Here's another one similar to Invincible, I'll say. If I was giving a list of like best shows, this one's probably going to be on it, and maybe you'll be surprised that it's not on my top 10. But it's just a show I viewed as okay. I can kind of understand the high quality of it. Obviously, it stars Bryan Cranston, Aaron Paul as Walter White, and Jesse Pinkman, where he's this chemistry teacher, I think, and he's trying to, you know, set up his family for the future, and he gets cancer, and he works alongside one of his former students, Jesse, and selling meth and stuff like that. So it's a pretty intense story, and it gets pretty crazy towards the end. It's like 5 seasons long, I believe. And I will say, it is probably the best ending in all of TV. So if you're looking for a satisfying conclusion to a TV show, here's the perfect one. A lot of shows really don't know how to end or where to end, and this is one that I think performed pretty effectively at doing so. So I can understand if it's on somebody's top 10 list. It's just not on my personal favorites as far as something that I'm really going to go back to and watch a whole lot, for example. So next up, we have Primal. So this one's a little bit different, and you may not be familiar with this one, but it's pretty much it's an animated show where there's actually no like verbal communication at all, which sounds a little bit strange, but it's about a caveman and this T-Rex who's kind of his pet. They kind of have they kind of butt heads periodically as well, but they're essentially just trying to survive in like the prehistoric era, and it's kind of an adventure story. Actually made by the guy who did Samurai Jack. What's his name? Like Gendy Tartakovsky or something like that. It's only a couple seasons long. I feel like I've heard them maybe doing like a season 3. I'm not sure if that's actually going to happen, but main reason I wouldn't consider it for my top 10 was the ending to the show was pretty bad, in my opinion. Like, I enjoyed season 1. I enjoyed a lot of season 2, but then the last episode of season 2, I feel like they took some turns that I did not prefer, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense when... I'm not going to spoil it necessarily, but there's a lot of things that happened previously in the show that, based off what happens in the final episode, it's like, how did that happen there, but it didn't happen previously? So, worth checking out, but you may not love the ending, in my opinion. All right, as I mentioned, we have a lot of honorable mentions here. So, next one, we have Modern Family. So this one's 11 seasons long. I actually have not seen all of it. I don't remember where I kind of stopped. I feel like I was like maybe halfway to like 2/3 through the show, somewhere around there. But it's got Ty Burrell, Julie Bowen, Ed O'Neill. It's kind of your typical sitcom, which I did look up the other day. I didn't know if I realized sitcom means situational comedy, but it makes sense there. But your typical vibe there, where you have like your family with this everyday life, and just stuff happens, and you have them like have to deal with different opinions and different things that come up in their life. So very basic sitcom as far as content wise, but it's got some funny moments and worth checking out. I can't necessarily endorse like later seasons because I haven't watched those, but I enjoyed the first half of the show for the most part. All right, next one is kind of a throwback, but I thought I'd include it with Boy Meets World. So this one was 7 seasons. I think most people probably know what the show is, but it's kind of your coming of age sitcom story about a boy, Corey Matthews, his brother Eric, his friend Sean, and then there's Topanga, Mr. Feeney, their teacher, who kind of weirdly is always their teacher. He's like their teacher from like 6th grade to like college, but it's fine. It you don't question it too much within the show because like, all right, that's fine. But I thought they did a good job as far as the progression throughout the show. Like, this is a show that I think did well at the ending, and it's not one that feels like the college episodes are still good, and the middle school episodes are good, the high school episodes are good. So I feel like despite different points of life for the main character, they all work effectively. I will say one thing though. One part I never understood was that Jonathan Turner, the teacher, who had I think he had a bike accident, they just wrote him out of the show. I don't know. I've never looked it up necessarily, but I'm like, he has an accident, but he's fine. But I feel like then he's just gone from the show. And maybe I'm misremembering it, but it feels like they just kind of disregarded him. They also actor swapped Topanga's parents, I believe. That one's not a big deal because they're kind of minor characters, but the Turner thing was super strange. But obviously more of a kid show growing up on Disney and stuff like that. But it was a fun time, worthwhile watch, and it probably still holds up today, I would imagine. All right. Then we have a show I've covered here on the channel, and you may be surprised I'm including it here based off my feedback on the most recent season, but it's Yellow Jackets. So there's 3 seasons so far. We haven't heard news yet on a season 4 or not, whether they'll renew it, but starting things off, you had some pretty famous actresses. You had Christina Ricci, Melanie Linsky, Juliette Lewis. It's pretty much was just about a girls' soccer team that crashed and had to survive in the wilderness. And you had these 2 timelines of the girls actually in that point in time, but then you also had them as adults. So you kind of knew who some characters were as far as, okay, you're going to survive. But there were some you were kind of left in the dark about. And it's kind of similar to a real life story. I think there was a rugby team that crashed maybe in South America or something like that. So it kind of gets inspiration from that. It's a little bit like Lord of the Flies, where you have these stranded kind of adolescents and how they adapt to this wilderness. There's a lot of twists and turns they've taken over the last few seasons when it comes to is there an entity going on here or not. I will say season 1 I feel far exceeds what we've gotten in the last couple seasons, so I don't know how long I would consider it an honorable mention if we kind of continue down the path we're going. But season 1 I think is worth a watch. I don't think you necessarily need to watch season 2 and 3 unless we get somewhere more satisfying in season 4. But I still kind of am there for the story, even if it's not as good in my opinion. But it kind of makes sense. I feel like the story works for. I think the music may have stopped. Oh, I didn't put it on loop. That's why. Cool. Should be playing again now. But I think the story works for. And hopefully the looping music's not super annoying. I think the story works for 1 season because it's kind of one plot. You have these girls stranded. But then when you stretch that out so long, you kind of get lost when it comes to, okay, is this what's happening here? How long can these girls actually still be in the wilderness? How many characters are we going to somehow have still alive as adults that we haven't heard about yet? So they kind of suffer from the Saw Apprentice dilemma where it's okay, we're adding characters now. But as I said, season 1, worth it. The other 2, not the strongest for me. All right, next up we have From. This is actually 3 seasons long. I've only watched season 1 and 1 episode of season 2 though, so I need to continue it. I've heard it's still solid, so it's one I need to get back to. It's pretty much a mystery sci-fi about whenever you drive into this town, you get stuck there, and there's this unknown forces that are keeping them there. And it's got the guy from Lost as well. He plays Boyd Stevens, I think is the name of the show, but it's kind of an interesting, it's kind of almost like Lost, where it's what's going on here? It's a mystery. What's is this a supernatural thing? What's going on? But as far as up through I watched, they were still trapped in the town and trying to figure things out. So there's also they can't go out at night. That was kind of a cool component because these creatures would show up. And then you have to barricade the doors and windows and stuff like that. So it was kind of a cool, almost horror adjacent component to it. So worth checking out, and I need to probably jump back into it at some point. All right, another one that's kind of a blast from the past, not super long, but Heroes. So this was 4 seasons. I think I watched them all, but it fell off super hard after the first season. So I'm not positive I actually wound up finishing it. I definitely got through like to season 3. But it was an excellent show at the beginning. It's kind of same as Yellow Jackets, where it's like, this is a good idea, but then we couldn't stretch things out further. Hey, good morning. Appreciate you being here, Lex. We have Hayden Panettiere's in it. Zachary Quinto, I think is his name, and then I'm gonna butcher his last name, but Milo, like Ventimiglia, the dude that's in like Art of Racing in the Rain and stuff like that. Pretty much the gist of it is you have these ordinary people finding out they have these superpowers, and you kind of are dealing with the forces of good and evil. I think the problem for the show was you had your established like characters with powers, and then you had like a dilemma with them, and you kind of resolved that, but then you kept adding more characters with powers as we went along. It's like, okay, everybody's got powers at this point. So it kind of tried to expand a little bit too much, and I think it tried to last a little bit too long. Even though it was only 4 seasons, it feels like a show that maybe would have been great just with like 1 or 2 seasons and then leave it at that and not touch it anymore. But the first season I think is worth watching. I haven't watched it in a long time. It's probably been about 15 years, but I really enjoyed it back in the day. Maybe I'll jump back to it at some point, but yeah, it was a good show as far as the first season. After that, it's kind of, you can bow out at that point. Next up, we have Black Mirror. So this is one that there's 7 seasons. I think I've watched up through 4, so I'm like pretty far behind at this point. They just had a new season come out, I believe. I think most people know what this is. It's on Netflix. It's kind of a fun, modern twist on like the Twilight Zone as far as the concept of like horror goes, but it involves more like technology. So it's kind of has more of that modern or futuristic vibe to it. And it's an anthology series, so each episode has different actors. There's actually quite a few faces you'll probably recognize from different movies and shows. So I thought it kind of had a good like approach to handling modern technology and advancements that we could have as far as like the risks you may run into when it comes to advancements, as far as like the impact on humanity and like how we incorporate technology into our everyday lives. And while some things may be like, hey, this is a lot more helpful as far as convenient, there's a lot of downsides as well. So I will say though, when I watched it, I think by default I started watching on like season 3, and I think that was a good choice by accident, because season 1, if you watch the first episode, that's probably my least favorite. So if you start on season 1 and watch the first episode and you didn't like it, I would say watch a couple more, because they are anthologies, so they're not all related to the same plot. And I think the plot of the first episode is not super great, and it's a little bit, it may turn you off from the show if you just only have that in your mind. All right, next up we have kind of a throwback. This one may be viewed as more of like a kid's show, but I included an honorable mention of Batman Beyond. So it kind of takes the original animated Batman series and advances it further to where you have Terry McGinnis, who's kind of like the new Bruce Wayne. Season 1, episode 1. Yeah, it was a bold choice for sure. It if you just watch that, you may be like, why do people like this? So I would not encourage people just to watch the first episode of Black Mirror and make an opinion based off that. Kind of surprised. I guess the latter half of season 1 is solid, but I'm surprised they would have renewed it based off just that one. Maybe people like it more than I did, but it was like, you got a little bit too edgy, I would say, and it didn't really work as well. I don't think they did as much with technology too in that one. It was kind of just more like politics, but yeah, Batman Beyond. You have Terry McGinnis, who's the new Bruce Wayne, so it kind of advances time where Bruce Wayne is an older figure at this point in time, and you still have the actor Kevin Conroy. Kind of funnily enough, I mentioned Boy Meets World earlier. Will Friedle, so Eric Matthews in that show, not the Eric Matthews from Saw, not Donnie Wahlberg, but Will Friedle, who plays Eric Matthews in Boy Meets World, is actually the voice actor who plays Terry McGinnis. So he plays the new Batman in Batman Beyond. And I don't know, I feel like I like that a little bit more than the animated series. Maybe I should kind of give both a rewatch, but I feel like Kevin Conroy does a good job as far as the older Bruce Wayne, and you have kind of a younger, newer, flashier Terry McGinnis playing Batman. And as you'd expect, it's kind of your typical like superhero show where there's like, oh, here's the villain of the week type thing, but it's a good time. It's overall pretty solid, I would say. Next up, similar to American Vandal, here's one that I probably would have strongly considered for my top 10. And if you asked me years ago, I probably would have had it in my top 10 list. And that's South Park. So this is definitely by far the longest tenured show of anything on this list I'll mention. I think, at least I'll have to double check that, but I feel pretty confident saying that. I think there's 26 seasons at this point of South Park, which is wild to say. It's kind of like The Simpsons when it comes to length. Everyone pretty much knows what it is at this point, but you have Trey Parker and Mark Stone, Trey Parker and Mark Stone. Or is it Matt Stone? Either way, you have those two guys that are, I'm wondering, I think it's Matt Stone. I feel like I was thinking Mark, but I think it could be Matt Stone. But you have those two guys who are kind of in other things like basketball and stuff like that, but you have them pretty much voicing, I remember they pretty much voicing all of the characters outside of a few extras they'll throw in there. I think also, what's his name? The dude from It Chapter 2 and Barry. I'm blanking on his name, but I think he's also plays some characters actually in some of the later seasons of South Park. For some reason I want to say Bill or something, but I don't know if that's actually true. But the fact that they were kind of able to take their original idea, and obviously the original seasons, like the early ones, are a little bit poorer quality when it comes to like the visuals, and they definitely improved those as we go along. But they took that original idea and pretty much just turned it into this Goliath as a TV show and a concept that's spanned into video games and different spin-offs. It probably, encouraged like the Book of Mormon as far as a play goes. So it's really like grown in success, and it's obviously a little bit vulgar. It's kind of a kid show because it's animated, but it's not really a kid show as far as the content goes. If you're not familiar with it, you have like Kyle, Stan, Kenny, Eric Cartman, who are like the kids, and they're like, I'm pretty sure they're always in is it, I want to say fourth grade, third grade? I want to say third grade, because I feel like the fourth graders at one point are like the bad in like the Lord of the Rings episode. But either way, they pretty much never age, so it kind of works out as far as continuing forever. Matt Stone, I feel like I wrote down Mark Stone when I was thinking through this, but I'm like, that doesn't sound right. I think it's Matt Stone. Yeah, Matt Stone and Trey Parker. Bill Hader, he was the other one that helped out. But you have these kids who are pretty much timeless in this show, and it takes at least kind of the more recent seasons. When it started, they kind of just picked whatever topic they wanted to cover as far as subject matter for the show, but I feel like they eventually evolved into being like, let's discuss current events on the show and kind of make fun of things. So it's just kind of a hilarious time. You also have like Randy Marsh, Stan's dad, who's hilarious to watch. So I have not watched the show since like they have their pandemic special, I think was like that feature length thing that they aired that one time. So the last few seasons probably I haven't watched. It got a little bit lower quality, I'll say, in some episodes. Like they had the whole like Tegrity Farms thing that got a little bit dragged out as far as a joke being a little bit stretched too much, but they still had some pretty like hilarious jokes, and there's a lot of great episodes to jump back to. And as I mentioned, this is probably a show that while it's not now, at one point it could have been. They definitely make fun of a lot of actors and stuff like that, or musicians. Like I'm thinking the one where you have like Tom Cruise in the closet. Like don't go there if you're expecting it to be like politically correct or anything, because they're obviously going to be making fun of pretty much everything, and they're not afraid to touch on anything. Like I think that's actually how, not to go down a deep rabbit hole, but I think the guy who played Chef, I think it was, I don't know exactly the details, but I thought he was maybe like part of Scientology or something, and they made fun of that, and he wasn't on board with that, so they wound up like getting rid of his character in the show. But they pretty much make fun of everything. They'll make fun of like every religion, so it's not necessarily the thing to go to when you're looking for like a positive thing, or necessarily like a thing to share with somebody that you're not really close with. But if you're looking for kind of like a parody on modern society, or kind of just funny time, it's worthwhile watching. So, all right, next up, we're almost done with the honorable mentions. We have The Boys, I mentioned on here. So there's 4 seasons of it. I've only watched 3, so I have not watched the latest season. There's kind of similar vibes. Obviously, they're both on Prime, but this and Invincible kind of are similar vibes when it comes to, that's animated, this is live action, but they're kind of more, a little bit more violent superhero type shows. This one gets a little bit more graphic than Invincible does in a few different areas other than violence, I'll say. But you have some pretty recognizable names. You have like Carl Urban, Anthony Starr I mentioned, who was in Banshees in this. You have Jack Quaid. And it's kind of a fun twist. As I mentioned, it's kind of graphic in a lot of episodes. So once again, similar to South Park, maybe watch who you're watching it with. But it's a twist on if superheroes were real and how they would potentially like rule society. So it's kind of more of a realistic take on how they would play into like capitalism and all that kind of stuff. As opposed to just being like a pure good guy. So most people probably know about it at this point in time, but a worthwhile watch as far as kind of a unique twist on, it's kind of like how Deadpool made superheroes a little bit unique as far as having an anti-hero. It's a little bit of that, but a little bit more graphic, I'll say. All right, last couple. So this one I threw on here. I wasn't sure if I wanted to include it, but I threw it on here anyway. Ted Lasso. Definitely a feel-good show. So there's, I think, 3 seasons so far. I'm actually only partway through season 2, but it stars Jason Sudeikis. It's pretty much a show about this American coach who gets hired to lead this European soccer team or football, whatever you want to call it, as a joke, but he winds up staying there, and it turns into somewhat of a feel-good story with some comedy mixed with some drama, but he winds up being like a decent coach, even though he knows nothing about soccer. But as I said, if you're kind of looking for just a uplifting show, it kind of fits that category as far as a positive experience, kind of completely opposite from The Boys, I'll say. So it's all right for the most part. I think it's on Apple, so you probably need to get that if you want to watch it, but decent show overall as far as what I've seen. I think they're coming out with a season 4 sometime soon as well, so still ongoing there. All right, then the last honorable mention. I know I've talked kind of long-winded on these, but we have one that it's going to surprise a lot of people, but I feel like I fit this more in the category of something that was impactful for me, more so than me thinking this is like an amazingly high-quality show. But I put Viva La Bam on here, and there were 5 seasons of this show, and pretty much it was a show revolved around, like a reality TV show revolved around Bam Margera. So if you're not familiar with him, he was the guy who was in like Jackass and CKY. Pretty much the point of the show is him and his parents, like Phil and April, are there, and Don Vito, his uncle, who kind of is not the greatest guy after seeing his kind of backstory, but either way, at the time, he was funny. But you have him, you have like Ryan Dunn, who unfortunately has passed away since then, but he was on the show. It was pretty much like the skater crew from Jackass and CKY. And they kind of just, it was almost like a sitcom of reality TV where they just kind of did whatever they wanted that day and came up with some idea to make some creative thing. Most of the show was kind of making his parents' life a living hell and messing with Don Vito. Like they would like, I don't know, it probably wouldn't age as well. Maybe it wouldn't be as funny these days as it was when I was younger, because they're pretty much just like playing pranks, which at this point I'm probably thinking that's like super immature, but at the time it was funny when they would do things like they had like a civil war because he had like this massive plot of land where they would just have these guys reenacting the Civil War. Or they would always just, as I said, mess with Don Vito and like crash his cars and stuff, and he would just like get so mad. So there wasn't much of a plot to it, and it's definitely not good TV. And I know Bam's life is not in the greatest spot, I think, now, but at the time, for what it was, I feel like I really enjoyed it, and definitely fits the category of like guilty pleasure or something I liked, but it may not be like good TV. All right, so that's the honorable mentions out of the way. And I know we kind of spent a lot of time on that, so we will now jump into the top 10, keeping in mind all the things I mentioned at the beginning with, you know, this is obviously a subjective list, and I encourage people to share their own top 10s if they have one potentially, or just shows they enjoy that may be worth talking about. So, all right, I do have visuals for these ones, so we will pop up the first one, which may surprise some people. I think for the most part, my list is not too surprising, but there's kind of some thrown in surprises. First one, we have Freaks and Geeks. So this one was kind of a cult classic, I'll say. So it's more of a drama show, and maybe I should get a little bit over the side so I don't block that. But it's kind of more of a drama show. It stars Sam and Lindsay Weir, who are kind of the main characters, which are what's his name, John Francis Daly, I think, and Linda Cardellini, who she's in a bunch of stuff. I think she's supposed to be the new Pamela Voorhees in the Crystal Lake show. So if that winds up being the case, hopefully good things come from that. But either way, it's more of your coming of age story with like being in high school. So that's a brother and sister there, and he's like the younger brother with his friend group, and she's like the older sister with her friend group, and he's like kind of more of your typical nerd, and she is more of your like trying to be popular. So she hangs out with more of a kind of like the burnout crew. But it's like a really good coming of age story. And as I said, it's kind of a cult classic because I believe at the time it wasn't very popular. Like it was, I think the time slot, from my understanding, kind of set it up for failure, but it was not something that was highly praised when it came out. And it's only one season, partially because of that. So was not supported enough to really keep it around for more than one season. But that one season they had, I should probably watch it again sometime soon because it's been a little bit of time, but there's so many recognizable faces. This is pretty much like the Judd Apatow crew. So he's the one that, I think he wrote the show. But other than the two I mentioned, Linda and John, you also had James Franco, you had Jason Segel, you had Seth Rogen, you had Shia LaBeouf, you had Rashida Jones, and these are all like when they're a lot younger. So it's kind of funny seeing them back in the day. So if you haven't watched it, it's kind of cool to see like maybe one of your favorite actors now is, you know, as a kid, pretty much playing a high school kid. And it's kind of, as I said, that Judd Apatow crew who did like, you know, Knocked Up, 40-Year-Old Virgin, or Superbad. It's kind of that crew. This was probably, I think, a little bit before Superbad, because I think this came out like what, maybe around, I'm guessing around like 2000. I don't really remember exactly, but it's kind of one of the first things that group put together. And I don't know, I'm probably a sucker for coming of age stories if they're done well, and you kind of have that set up here where, as I said, the younger crew is Sam and his friends, and they're kind of the nerdy kids trying to find their way, and you have Lindsay and her friends, and they're like being mischiefs a little bit more and stuff like that. So it's kind of balancing those two as far as those two crews, and it has a lot of like stereotypes from like high school like groups of people pretty much, but it's kind of a feel-good story still with having that as well, though, I'll say. So definitely one that's a little underrated, and it was underrated at the time. It's kind of pretty highly praised now, I'll say. I should look sorry, my page was over the side. Yeah, here's your kind of your main cast of characters that I'll say in the show, and you can definitely tell how much younger they look there. So sad when it ended after one season. Yeah, it was a bummer. But I didn't watch it when it aired, so I can't say I was like supporting it. I kind of found out about it much after the fact, so I don't think it necessarily had the strongest like marketing, or as I said, I think the time slot kind of screwed it, and I don't know, just a lot of the outside factors limited its success. But for the one season you get, it's definitely worth checking out. So for now, I have this placed at my number 10 slot. All right, maybe able to switch this. Number 9. Another surprise maybe for some people. I'm going to go with King of Queens. So a lot of people have their favorite like back in the day sitcom. Obviously there's more modern ones as well, but I kind of view this as like, I don't know, 90s. It's kind of late 90s, early 2000s, but you had like this, you had like, maybe this will spoil my list, but a lot of people love like Seinfeld, or Everybody Loves Raymond, or that type of sitcom comedy. Those ones don't work as well for me. I haven't necessarily watched them from like start to finish, so maybe that impacts my decision a little bit. But King of Queens, I feel like is a classic. It's not necessarily like high quality TV, but it's something that if it's just like on TV, it's very easy just to like watch an episode, especially if you've watched it already. But pretty much the premise is, if you're not familiar, I feel like most people probably are with this one. But it's a sitcom of Doug and Carrie Heffernan. And you obviously have Kevin James here and Leah Remini. You also have kind of some other recognizable faces, like Jerry Stiller plays Carrie's father. And you also have Patton Oswalt, and Lou Ferrigno, so the guy who played the Hulk back in the day, makes a few appearances. So they're pretty much just in New York, and it's kind of your typical sitcom where they're just living their everyday life. He's like a delivery driver. She works as like a secretary in an office, and things come up. It's definitely very comedy heavy with Kevin James. That's probably obvious, and with Jerry Stiller too. So I feel like it's a good mix of feel good moments. It's not necessarily super deep plot points necessarily, but it does have a story if you kind of watch it from start to finish. So there is that, but at the same time, I'm not watching it for that. Honestly, when it got towards the later seasons, it definitely feel like they were trying to do more with the story and they didn't really know how to end it. So I don't know if it necessarily had the strongest ending, but it's not really meant to be. I feel like most sitcoms, they don't need to have a strong ending. It's kind of, you're watching it for the in-between episodes to see kind of what happens in that episode. But there's just some classic moments, particularly between Doug and Carrie's mom, or Carrie's dad. So between Jerry Stiller and Kevin James. Like I'm thinking of when he tells him to call this great Italian joint called Domino's, obviously Domino's, or he's giving him the phone number and he's like trying to relay it to him. He's like, all right, what's the number? And he says like 17. Obviously he's already pushed the 7. So he's like, I can't go back. So it's kind of dumb humor like that, but it's definitely similar to Freaks and Geeks, but maybe even more so. It's kind of something you can just pop on for like a feel good, like I don't really need to be paying attention too much. I can just kind of watch the scene and have a good laugh with it. So probably not people's favorite sitcom, but it's one that I've watched many times through, and it's one I really enjoy, just as far as something to throw on and have a good time with. So all right, so that is number 9. We will jump now to number 8. All right, so we have Cobra Kai. So this is obviously more of our recent stuff. This is one, if you haven't seen it, it's probably pretty obvious from the poster or whatever. This is based on the original Karate Kid cast. I'm actually wearing, I don't know if you can see it, I'm wearing my Cobra Kai outfit, or my shirt today. So, but this is one that I didn't have like a strong history with Karate Kid. Obviously, I'm familiar with it. I have watched at least the first one. I don't feel like I necessarily had like a lot of memory as far as what took place other than major plot points like the crane kick and stuff like that, but I didn't remember all the characters, so that I didn't have the nostalgia for Karate Kid, I'll just say. So I wasn't as like urgently trying to watch this, but you know, I'd heard good things, and we got Netflix at one point, and I was like, all right, I'll throw this on. But it's pretty much your drama series about Johnny Lawrence and Danny LaRusso. So the two characters you see here, obviously in the original show, Danny LaRusso was your main character. He was kind of the bullied kid, and Johnny Lawrence was your bully, who's kind of the, you know, thinks he's a hot shot and stuff like that. And they kind of take a twist on that with Cobra Kai, where it's like, actually, let's cover things from the perspective of Johnny. He's the main character now. And it's about him kind of getting his life together. He's pretty much been a burnout since Karate Kid, essentially. So after losing to Danny LaRusso, he winds up kind of just not doing much with his life. And he winds up returning to karate, and you have him with characters like, you can probably see on here, but you have Miguel, Robbie, HOC, Sam, Tori. So he winds up opening his own dojo, bringing Cobra Kai back, and then kind of funnily enough, when that happens, you have Danny LaRusso's like, all right, I'm bringing Mr. Miyagi stuff back too. So you have him kind of opposing sides back in the valley and duking it out. You also have this show kind of probably overstates its welcome a little bit. I think there's 6 seasons, so it probably could have ended after like 4. I think there's 6 seasons. It's either 5 or 6. I believe it's 6, but you kind of introduce characters from Karate Kid that, as I said, I didn't have the attachment to, but I think it still worked. You get like backstory with characters like John Kreese or Terry Silver, but I don't think you have to watch the old stuff to really enjoy it. And they kind of just continue to like bring on new bad guys as we go along here. Like originally, it was the feud between Johnny and Danny. Then you brought Kreese in. Now he's the bad guy. And then Kreese didn't become too bad, so then Terry was the bad guy. So, as I said, they kind of drag things out a little bit. There's also some bit of unbelievability in it. Like you have, I won't spoil it, but you have one of the characters have a severe accident and magically recovers. So it's just, some of the stuff feels like you gotta watch it with a grain of salt or like not take it super seriously, but it's kind of a fun drama, I'll say, where there's some comedy thrown in. Like Johnny is just like oblivious to everything. He's like not familiar with technology and stuff, so he's kind of getting reintegrated with society almost. And he's probably the star of the show. William Zabka, Ralph Macchio as Danny's okay too, but my probably two favorites in the show were Johnny and Miguel. So I imagine it's kind of pitched to be that way because it's the main character and his like main student from the very beginning. So definitely a show worth checking out, even if you haven't seen the original Karate Kid, I'll say. And I will say, the ending, while it was stretched out a long time, they handled it pretty well. Was it convenient? Yeah, it was very convenient. It's a little goofy how they handled some of the characters, I'll say, but they wrapped it up at least nicely enough for me, I'll say. All right. Moving on to number 7. So back to the sitcom side of things. I didn't realize how many sitcoms I actually enjoyed because I didn't fully expect that many to be on this list, but here we are. So How I Met Your Mother. So this is one that came out, it's probably been a while now. Like I remember I watched it like 15 years ago-ish. 15, 16 years ago. But it's pretty much the story about Ted Mosby telling his kids, based off the title, you can tell how he met their mother. And you have Bob Saget, who's actually the narrator here, and he's telling the story, and then we have it kind of playing out episode by episode as in your typical sitcom manner, with Ted, who's played by Josh Radnor. You also have some pretty famous names here as well. You have Jason Segel, Neil Patrick Harris, Allison Hannigan, and then Kobe Smulders kind of blew up after this. Like she wound up being in stuff like the Marvel movies afterwards as well. So pretty strong cast. You have those characters are like Ted, Barney, Marshall, Robin, Lily. It's your typical, they're like in New York and they go to the bar a lot and they talk about their lives, and Ted's constantly trying to find his wife and a lot of BS happens. He winds up dating a lot of people along the way. But this is a show I binged like pretty heavily back around when it was going on. And I enjoyed it for the most part. There's definitely, similar to King of Queens, this is one you can just throw on and say, I'm going to just pop an episode in and whatever one's on, I'll enjoy it. Hey, J-Dev, how dare you do this while working up to watch the playback? All right, appreciate it, man. I wasn't sure what time I wanted to run this, but I figured this was a time that may work. But to your point, the VOD will be up if you're interested at all in hearing my thoughts as far as my list goes. But appreciate you hopping in at least for a second, though. When I finish, I think I know most of your list at this point. I think you've shared already, but definitely would be open to hearing your own personal top 10. I spend a lot of time on the honorable mentions, I'll say. So if you want to get to the juicy stuff, we're kind of in the meat of that now. So, but yeah, How I Met Your Mother was a super strong sitcom that I binged through. And as far as any criticisms of the show, I'll say that this is an example of a show that doesn't end effectively, in my opinion. Since it is a sitcom, I do kind of forgive that. It doesn't necessarily have to have a strong ending. It's kind of more about the journey. And I don't want to spoil it for people, but we kind of took the predictable route after going along this like massive amount of tangents as far as how Ted's going to meet the mother of his kids. And I don't know. It felt like they probably should have taken either a more direct path, or when they went on all these tangents, landed on one of those tangents. But that's all I'll say without spoiling too much. But the ending for the show is not super strong for me, but the episodes you watch throughout are a great time and just enjoyable watch. And I also, I was a big fan of Jason Segel, kind of from other stuff, and I kind of grew to like Neil Patrick Harris throughout the show as well. So definitely worthwhile checking out if you're a fan of sitcoms and you haven't watched this one. I think there's a spinoff like How I Met Your Father. I haven't watched that. I can't imagine it's probably that good if I'm being honest, but this one definitely check out, especially the first few seasons. I think like the first 4 I remember watching like back to back constantly at one point in time. So worth checking this out if you have not watched it. All right, let's jump into the next one we have here. Stranger Things. So back on the Netflix side of things. So this is one I think I don't know if I have to give too much detail on these plot points since most people probably know them, but if you don't know it, this is a horror themed coming of age story taking place in the 80s in like rural Indiana, I believe. Once again, as I said, I'm kind of a sucker for coming of age stories. On top of that, we have a horror twist inclusion here, which I'm also a sucker for. I also do enjoy the 80s stuff. It's kind of gotten a little bit stale with so many things that came out like after this or around the same time of this, as far as milking the 80s like time period a little bit too much, but I still enjoy watching it, even though I'm more of a 90s person myself. But it's fun kind of having that setting as a backdrop, I'll say, with like going to the mall or riding bikes or whatever and that kind of stuff. But you have your kind of main cast of 11, Mike, Will, Lucas, Dustin. You have Steve, the older kid, who kind of becomes, the first season, he does a complete turnaround. I've heard, I don't know how much I'm talking spoilers in this stuff, but I've heard that they wanted Steve not to be as integral to the story in season 1, like after that. But he was liked so much by everybody that they're like, all right, you're one of the main guys now. So, because I remember season 1, I was like Team Jonathan all the way. And then after season 1, I'm like, all right, Steve is way better than Jonathan. Because Jonathan kind of just turned into like Nancy's like boyfriend pretty much. Which I think they are together in real life too. So that's kind of cool. But then on top of that, you added new characters. You had like Max. I think in season 2, she got introduced. Then you had Robin, Billy, Eddie. You had Martin Brenner. Obviously, as far as villains go, you had like the Demogorgon. You had Vecna. First season, you had Barb, which Justice for Barb was like a big thing when this came out, I remember. And yeah, the show just overall, I think, hits so many points really effectively. And I feel like it wasn't the first show to necessarily do this, because there was like other stuff that did the 80s and horror kind of combining those elements pretty well. Like I'm thinking of Super 8 was a movie that came out a while ago that kind of did that as well. But I feel like as a show, they just hit a lot of points with this. As far as like famous actors that didn't get famous from the show, I feel like the show made a lot of the younger actors famous. Going into it, you had like David Harbour and Winona Ryder. You also have Sean Astin as Bob, and I think season 2 it is. So there's a lot of like recognizable faces, and this show made a lot of recognizable faces. But you have like them. It's kind of just a cool like story of these kids going up against these like evil forces and just having to take them on without the help of like larger like police forces or anything like that. Although I will say the parents, maybe not the general town parents, but the parents involved in this, like obviously Winona Ryder and David Harbour's characters, they get involved in helping too. So it's not one of those completely where it's just like, oh, the kids take care of everything and the parents don't believe them. So they get involved as well. So it's cool that it's not just completely unbelievable where the kids are just solving everything on their own. There is some plot armor with the show, I'll say. That's probably one criticism I'll give, because you have these characters that are like there from the beginning and they're thrown in these like very tough situations and they wind up surviving. And maybe this is a little spoilery, but not too much. I feel like a lot of times they'll introduce characters to a season, and then when they do that, they're kind of growing the cast, and you kind of know somebody's gonna have to die that season based off like the show's subject matter, and they kind of lean towards always killing off the new characters. So it's like, yeah, I don't want my characters I like to die, but you introduce these new people and we kind of just know right off the bat, like, all right, if someone's gonna die, it's gonna be them. They also kind of do the thing a little bit too much where they spend a majority of the season like separated in groups. Like you'll have like these subgroups of like, all right, these 3 kids are over here, the 2 parents are here, the older kids are here, or like Dustin and Steve are here. And it takes you out of some scenes where you're kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit too much. So that's probably one criticism I'll give, where we're trying to balance too many subplots, and that doesn't give too much screen time for certain characters. Like even the latest season, which was really good, I kind of feel like the crew that was in California like, what was it, Jonathan and Will, and who else was out there? Mike, maybe? Whoever was out in that crew with like the pizza dude with like the long hair. I feel like they didn't have much to do last season. So when you're adding these new characters each season, like you're adding Eddie, who's an awesome character, you're having to give him screen time. So you're balancing a little bit too many stories, and that makes it hard to get really invested in one story. But then they at least wind up they do this kind of every season, feels like, where these groups in separate areas, and then they all converge to one spot in like the last episode or two where they work together as a team. And they've kind of done that probably a little bit too much as far as like the formula for it every season. But beyond that, I feel like it's a strong show. And if you're doing well at season 4, this far out, you're doing a lot of things great. I feel like season 5's taken a long time to make. This show kind of has the problem that Yellow Jackets, I feel like, is going to have too, where, all right, these kids are supposed to be, I guess Stranger Things, the older kids graduated at least, so they've aged a little bit, but you have these kids that are like playing high schoolers, and it's like, dude, you're like 30. I guess Cobra Kai had that too. Like, I think Sam was like, I don't know exactly, but I think she was like around like 30-ish. So that's the hard part when you have these shows where you're like, oh, these are high school kids, and then it's like 6 seasons long. It's like, I don't know if you can really pull that off anymore. I feel like you need to either have a like advancement of time in the story, or I don't know what, end it sooner, because I don't know if I'm going to believe these kids are still however old they're supposed to be whenever season 5 does come out. I think the next season's supposed to be the final season, and they'll probably like chop it up into different time periods of release, I'll imagine, because that's kind of what they've done recently. But all in all, Stranger Things effective show. All 4 seasons I think were pretty good. I don't know where I would place them ranking wise. I kind of feel like in the middle there, it probably got a little bit like more of a down. Like, I don't know, seasons 2 and 3, there was probably parts in those. Was season 2 the one I think that had the Chicago episode? That was especially bad. I'm glad. I will say this, I'll give them credit. The writers realized that storyline of Eleven doing her own separate thing was not enjoyed by fans, and they kind of abandoned that. So being able to pivot, I think, is smart to be able to do that stuff. Like, for example, when the Sonic movie came out and they wound up changing his appearance, I think it's smart whenever you're listening to fans. Obviously, don't do it 100% because you'll never finish a product, or you can't please everybody, obviously, but I think that episode was universally not liked, and I'm glad they went away from that at least. So, but yeah, Stranger Things, definitely worth checking out. I think most people probably know about it at this point in time, but it's a cool story. All right, let's jump to number 5. This is one that may surprise some people. So, Over the Garden Wall. This is obviously an animated show. It's also one that I did not watch when it first came out, so it's kind of a watch a little bit later, similar to Freaks and Geeks, but it's somewhat of your adventure-themed show around the fall time period or the Halloween season. You have these brothers, Wirt and Greg, and there's also Beatrice, the bird, there. And they're like traveling in this strange forest, trying to find their way out. That's kind of the general plot, without going into too much spoilers. But there's actually a lot of like good actors in this. Like, you have Elijah Wood playing Wirt. You have Melanie Linsky, who's playing the bird. Christopher Lloyd is, at least in the first episode, I think he's in a couple others later on as well. You have like John Cleese and Tim Curry, who are surprisingly thrown in there as well. Colin Dean plays Greg, and I will say I don't think he's in like anything else for the most part other than this show. I could be wrong there, but I don't feel like I know him from anything else. But he does an awesome job in this show. Like, the chemistry between Elijah Wood and him, as far as the two brothers, is just incredible. And you may be surprised for me to have like this kind of show this high, but it's definitely worth checking out. Similar to some of the other ones I mentioned, this is only 1 season long, so it's kind of just your get in, get out type of experience. It's not super long. I think the episodes are actually pretty short too. Like, I don't think they're more than like 20 minutes, and there's only like 10 of them or so. So pretty quick story as far as the actual content goes. And it's something I would say definitely worth checking out. If you haven't watched it, it's kind of similar to Freaks and Geeks. It's also kind of some of your cult classic where it's not really super well known, but the people that do know it like passionately enjoy it. So I won't say too many spoilers, but it's super hilarious. And as I said, the chemistry between the two main characters is awesome, and just it has some of the best one-liners of any show, I'll say. And the vibes, just the Halloween aesthetic, definitely around like October, worth running through this and checking it out. So definitely, if you haven't seen Over the Garden Wall, check it out. All right, let's jump to number 4 here. We're sticking with the animated side of things. So JDev, you may be disappointed in my list here, but I stand by all the ones in my top 10. So if you haven't seen them, I would say they're worth at least giving them a chance. At least, like, I think the first episode of like Over the Garden Wall is on YouTube. So a lot of these you can easily watch just in various ways. So The Legend of Vox Machina. Sorry, I feel like my nose is like itching me a whole lot. But so this show is on Prime, and it's kind of a unique concept where it's based off of, so it's an action animated show. It's based off of this group of people that are called Critical Role, and they play D&D together, like in real life. And a lot of them are voice actors, so they're like extremely good at their craft. And they're playing D&D, and as far as my understanding, they played like a campaign of D&D with these characters. I think there's some minor tweaks because I think there's one character that's not included as far as at least some of the story. But they're playing through like D&D in real life. Like they stream this stuff on like Twitch and stuff. And they took that content and they turned it into an animated TV show. So pretty much the point of this is it's like an action animated show. I've watched only 2 seasons, so this is the only show I think on this list. I don't know for sure if that's the case. Let me double check the ad. Yeah, this is the only show on this list that I have not watched all of the seasons of. So I will say that means there's pretty high praise here. I have not watched all the seasons. So I watched 2. There's 3 that are out. I don't know if they're continuing with a 4th one or not. I believe it's been renewed for a 4th season, but don't quote me on that. But as I said, as far as the subject matter here, we have a D&D themed show with a group of 8 heroes here, and they're on quests that like pretty much to save the world. And it's kind of your ragtag bunch of characters. Like they even make kind of the joke in the first episode where there's typical heroes you would expect to be saving everybody, and this group is not that. These are kind of more your like secondary heroes that by default just kind of fill in that placeholder. But from the picture here, so we have Keyleth, who's the one with like the staff there. We have Vex and Vax, so the 2 elves. So the girl with the bow and the guy with the little knives there. We have Pike, who's the little girl there with the shield there. And we have Scanlan, who's playing the little like flute there. And we have Grog, who's like the huge guy with the weapon there. And then we have Percy, the one with the gun. So it's kind of unique to having somebody with like a gun, I feel like, in this world, but it still kind of fits. But as I said, it's kind of just a ragtag group of characters. The first season covers like Percy's history, I believe, with like the history with this other group called the Briarwoods, who are like vampires. And there's like dragons as well, who kind of get incorporated in season 2 and going forward. But season 2, I think, covered more of Vex and Vax's backstory. But it kind of reminds me, if anyone's watched the D&D movie with Chris Pine, which is an underrated movie. That's honestly, whatever year that came out, that was probably one of my favorite films of the year. But this has a similar vibe, if you've seen that, where it comes to the theme, obviously is D&D based, but on top of that, you kind of have characters who are kind of comedic, but they're also like effective at their job. So it's kind of that balance of like very much action based, where there's a lot of stuff visually going on, but there's also like a lot of jokes thrown in here and there. Especially Scanlan in this show is kind of your comedic relief, I'll say. So if you haven't watched it, I would definitely say check it out, because it's super underrated as far as the show goes. And the way it's created from, as I said, this group of people who just play D&D in real life and just take that and turn it into a show concept is brilliant. They also have other campaigns they've done. I don't know if they'll wind up turning those into shows or not, but this is just one of the campaigns they wound up running, and yeah, it's a great time. So I realize it sounds a little bit nerdy, but I think even if you're not like a D&D fan, similar to if you're not a Cobra Kai or not a Karate Kid fan, you can get into Cobra Kai. I don't think you have to be a fan of D&D to like The Legend of Vox Machina. I think it's worthwhile as far as just if you're into like adventure stories and good character development and things like that, definitely check this one out. All right. Getting into the the final stretch here. So we're at top 3. Kind of maybe what you'd expect for a lot of people. We have The Office here. So I think everyone's aware of The Office at this point in time. Another sitcom. So once again, I have more sitcoms than I would have expected. This one, if you're not familiar, it's kind of about everyday life, working in this paper company in Scranton, Pennsylvania. You have like a bunch of characters here. It's your typical, like, this is them going to work, but then also different situations come up. You have Michael Scott, played by Steve Carell, who's kind of like the office manager. You have Jim Halpert, played by John Krasinski. Dwight Schrute, played by Rainn Wilson. You have Pam Beesly. Andy Bernard, played by Ed Helms. Kevin Malone, he's played by Brian Baumgartner. I don't think he's in a whole lot of stuff, but he's probably my favorite in the show because he's kind of like he's not the brightest person, but he has like good intentions, so he's hilarious. You have Stanley, Oscar, Angela, Toby, Creed, Kelly, Phyllis. There's so many characters like Ryan, Daryl. Just an incredible show. I would say if you haven't watched it, like, in continuity, this is one that's worth watching like progressively in the story. I mentioned King of Queens is something you can just throw on, or How I Met Your Mother you can throw on, and those have story progressions, but I don't think they're as important. The Office, it kind of matters a little bit more where you are in the story. So while each episode can be a standalone, when this show first came out, I like kind of passively watched an episode and I'm like, I don't get it. It's not that funny. Like, the humor is a little bit too, it felt like it was too dumb for me. I was like, this is not funny. But after watching it like kind of from beginning to end, and you're getting the story as well as the comedy, I think it works really effectively. I will say the first season, this is based off the British Office. The first season kind of resembles that a little bit too heavily for me, where it's a little bit more dry humor. You have Michael Scott, who's a little bit less like likable as a character. He's more just blunt and rude. Like, he still makes jokes later on in the season or in the show, but he doesn't do it in a way that's like demeaning or makes him unlikable. He kind of still is he's more funny and you're rooting for him later on. Whereas the first season, you're like, you're just kind of the worst. So watch the first season, but don't limit things by the first season, I'll say. Even like his hairstyle changes. Like, instead of being like slicked back, he kind of has more just your general hairstyle. So there's a lot of changes from the pilot in the first season. I think the first season is only like 4 or 5 episodes long anyway, and later ones are like more like 20 episodes. So definitely a good story, progression of characters, and just they're evolving over time. Like, you have Jim and Pam obviously get closer. You introduce new characters like Andy or Daryl kind of throughout the show as well. And yeah, just effective as far as a character piece and just focusing on their growth. And each character kind of plays a certain role in the show, kind of like an Office would, where you have like, okay, this is the accounting department, you're the HR. You kind of have like, okay, this is the guy who provides comedy, this is the guy who provides kind of more of your dry humor, this is more of your serious conversations. Like, I don't know, Michael with Toby is very dry humor because Michael just hates Toby, the HR guy. So each character kind of has a role. You have Jim playing pranks on Dwight, and their evolvement to become friends later in the show is interesting to watch as that develops. I will say the end of the season, or the end of the show, not as great. So with most sitcoms, they kind of have a hard way of trying to figure out how to end it. Although I will say they end it effectively, just the later seasons aren't as great. So whenever we introduce characters like Nellie or Robert California or Will Ferrell's character or those other 2 guys who join the Office, it kind of goes downhill, especially after Michael. I mean, this is kind of spoilers, but not really. But Michael, so Steve Carell leaves at the end of season 7. And when he leaves, they try to introduce these other characters to fill his place. But I don't think they necessarily work. Like, even, I don't know, Idris Elba was a character I like as like an actor, and he's in this. I don't think he does the greatest job. He's better than some of those other characters I just mentioned, but it feels like they were trying to figure out where to go after he left. I assume he probably wound up going over to like movies and stuff. And that's why Steve Carell left. But season 8 is probably my weakest season as far as how rough it is, just because your kind of anchor of the show is gone and other characters are good enough. Like, you have Jim and Dwight and stuff, but it felt like they kind of fell off after Michael left. Season 9 as a closeout, I think, is better than 8, though, I will say. And the way they close things out with kind of recapping things. So as far as the actual plot goes, this isn't super important until like randomly later in the show, especially. But technically, the whole show is supposed to be this documentary of this camera crew filming kind of the day in the life of somebody in the office, and you kind of abandon that for the most part, where you're just having characters talk to the screen and you're kind of not aware that there's this other group that's filming this. But towards the end, they kind of actually have more of like the background characters with like the boom mic and stuff like that, and turning it into an actual TV show. But I think they come full circle and wrap things up. So while season 8's rough, season 8's rough, season 9's kind of mid for me, I think they close things out probably better than some of the other sitcoms as far as full circle. Let's wrap things up. So that's where The Office goes for me. And definitely, once again, one that you can throw on. If you've watched it already, you can throw on and pretty much watch any episode. If you haven't, I recommend going from progressively start to finish, though. All right, next up is not going to be a surprise if you're familiar with the channel here at all. We have Dexter. And I just chose this image. I think it was like the first IMDb one. I think this is like from season 7, I assume, because at the end of season 6, the tagline there would make sense. But we have Dexter. So I could probably talk at length about Dexter. Obviously, I've covered it pretty lengthily on the channel here. I did a ranking of the seasons for me. I covered Original Sin. So I will say my placement here of having Dexter, for me personally, obviously everyone can do things differently, but I'm looking at just the original 8 seasons of Dexter as an independent like franchise or series. I'm not including Original Sin, and I'm not even including New Blood. So I realize like Michael C. Hall and so forth are in New Blood, but I'm treating those as not part of Dexter, even though they're in the same Dexter universe. I'm kind of viewing it like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, where it's like, you're a separate show for me. I understand if people include New Blood, especially. Original Sin's kind of, because you don't even have Michael C. Hall, I feel like that's pretty distinct, but I could see some people including New Blood in Dexter as far as like an actual ranking. But for my purposes, I'm not including it. We're just doing Dexter seasons 1 through 8. And I've obviously covered it pretty lengthy on the channel, so you're probably familiar with the show, but this one is once again a drama series. It's a show similar to How I Met Your Mother that I heavily binged to catch up to where it was. So I started watching it during season 4, I believe, and then was watching live, I think from 5 on, if I remember correctly. But I pretty much just caught up to this thing right away. I would just play an episode, it would end, I would just put on the next one then. And it's one I've gone back to. I don't do this a lot with drama series. I feel like sitcoms are easy to throw on episodes and be like, all right, let's rewatch that. It's funny. Let's watch that moment again. Whereas drama stuff, you're like, I know what happens, so I don't need to kind of relive it. It's already been seen. The thing's been spoiled, so. But this is one I did rewatch like quite a few times, especially, and it's definitely one when you play one episode, it's hard not to just have it continue to play the next episode if you have it there, like, ready to go. I could probably talk for hours just about Dexter, and I have here on the channel already, but as far as characters go, awesome cast of characters in the original series. You have obviously Dexter, you have his sister Deb, you have Harry, his father, playing this kind of like ghost figure, if you will, where it's like Dexter's imagining him. And if you're not aware of this, Dexter's actually based off a book series. Although the original book, the first Dexter book, and season 1 of Dexter have some overlap, like you have the Ice Truck Killer, and well, you have Brian Moser in there. They end differently, though. I won't spoil it, but season 1 and the first book end differently, but they have, for the most part, overlapping plots. After that, the books and the show go completely different directions, and I think the show probably is a little bit better, in my opinion. I watched it before I read the book, so I'm probably a little biased in that aspect, but I think for the most part, I would say the show is my recommended way to digest it. I do have the book series, so I probably should give them another read through, but it's still a good time. But I probably just prefer the show overall. But obviously you have Harry. I don't think Harry's actually in, I mean, it makes sense, but I don't think he's in the books as a character. But it kind of works better in a show where you have to have this physical figure in front of him, like having a dialogue. I think more so in the books, it's Dexter talking to himself, which he does in the show, but I think it works better having somebody else he's talking to as well. Michael C. Hall does great at doing like an inner monologue, but I don't know. I just love the actor too of Harry as well. He's in other stuff like Fast and Furious and things like that too. But on top of that, you get characters introduced. Like you have Joey Quinn get introduced later on. Loved him as a character. You have Rita and her two kids, Aster and Cody, which I know a lot of people are mixed on Rita because she kind of was just always bothering Dexter. So if you want to see him do like his typical Dexter stuff, you probably would get annoyed with Rita. But I thought she worked as a character overall. She's actually also in, ironically, she's in King of Queens also. So another thing I mentioned here on the list. Not like consistently, just in a few episodes, but it's fun to see kind of crossing over characters in a lot of these shows that you don't fully expect. Like I mentioned, Will Friedle in Batman Beyond and Boy Meets World. Or you had Jason Segel, who was in Freaks and Geeks, but also in How I Met Your Mother. So fun to see kind of different characters in multiple things that we wound up enjoying. But you had Maria LaGuerta, you had James Dokes, Vince Masuka, so like the whole Miami Metro crew. You had Thomas Matthews. Frank Lundy was an awesome character as far as being in the show, not as much as I probably wanted. Same with Dokes. I feel like, I don't know, we're getting down the spoiler route here, but characters I really wish had more screen time. Then as far as like the big bads of the villains, you had Brian Moser as the Ice Truck Killer. Lila West, I didn't love. Maybe I'll probably at some point do like a villains ranking. You kind of run into the problem where like, what counts as a villain? Is it somebody who's against Dexter, or is it somebody who's actually like killing people? And then within seasons, you have like two villains sometimes. Like season 3, you have the Skinner, but then you also have Miguel Prado, who, in my opinion, is a more prominent figure in season 3 with Jimmy Smits. Then season 4, you have Arthur Mitchell with Trinity with John Lithgow, who's awesome. Once again, John Lithgow, also in How I Met Your Mother. It was funny though watching him in that after seeing him in this, because he's like a cold-hearted killer in this. And then you switch over to How I Met Your Mother, and he's playing, I think, Barney's dad, and he's just like, I want to hang out with you, son. He's like trying to be like a good father in that. It's like, you are pretty diverse, John Lithgow. I don't know how well you're doing that, but watching him in like this dark stuff and then going over to like, oh, you're in a comedy now. Like he was in what, like Daddy's Home 2 or whatever that was, where I watched him now, like you were playing a totally different character. He's pretty diverse though. He's in a lot more stuff than you realize. Like I think is he Lord Farquaad in Shrek? Like he's in so many things that you don't even like consciously think of, especially when it's like a voice acting role. But he is obviously a lot of people's favorite big bad of Dexter, so has a big place in the Dexter lore as far as making his mark. You had like Jonah Mitchell, his son, who has a little bit more reference later on as well. Jordan Chase was okay as a villain, I thought. You had somebody who's like a smaller villain like Stan Liddy or Lewis Green later on as well. You had Travis Marshall and Professor Geller. I didn't love that side plot. I may tell you where I rank some people, but I already talked about that in my season review probably as well. Brother Sam was kind of the only thing I really enjoyed from season 6. Like that season overall was a little bit weak for me. You had Isaac Serco, rest in peace to Ray Stevenson. He was awesome as far as a villain goes and having a lot of depth. I don't need my villain. I feel like they've kind of overkilled sometimes having a villain be like too much of a good guy or having too much of a like relatable experience or too much of an anti-hero. Like I'm thinking of somebody like Thanos, where it's like, you're bad, but I kind of get where you're coming from. But I thought Isaac Serco was kind of a good balance of like a bad guy, but you're like, you know what? I respect you. You also the scene where he just like takes out everybody in that bar was awesome to see. So he was a great foe. Season 7 overall is a little bit mixed for me, but I thought he was a strong component to that. You obviously got Hannah McKay mentioned there. I don't know if J-Dev's still here, but if you're watching the VOD back, shout out for that, because I know that's your go-to. She was fine for me. I don't know, most of Dexter's love interests, I don't feel like I necessarily needed. Honestly, Lumen was probably one of the ones that I thought was the best, because she was more actively involved in the story. Obviously, Rita had no idea what Dexter was really doing. You had Lumen, who's taking on the big bad with Dexter. You get a little bit of that with Hannah. She kind of goes from being bad to good, and all the ways in between as well. And then season 8, you had Elway with Sean Patrick Flannery. Zach Hamilton was an underrated character. I've said this before, but I wish Harrison wound up being like Zach Hamilton in New Blood, but we kind of got a different twist on it, which maybe how Harrison is more believable or more likely to happen, but I would have preferred a Zach Hamilton type of character, and they kind of did that character dirty. And then you had Oliver Saxon as the brain surgeon, which I thought was not the greatest, and then Evelyn Vogel and her whole kind of retconning some of Harry's stuff that I don't feel like it's recognized really anymore, but it was fine. Honestly, I've said this in I think my season rankings. I don't hate season 8 as much as a lot of people. I think they could have done a lot of things differently, and I disliked the ending when it first came out, but I grew to appreciate it kind of as time passed, especially when we got New Blood. Honestly, as I mentioned, this doesn't include New Blood as far as like my ranking of Dexter. I'm only doing this seasons 1 through 8, but I will say I've only watched New Blood one time, but when I did watch it, I was turned off from Dexter as a show so heavily that I wasn't sure I wanted to, like I mentioned, I've rewatched Dexter periodically, just like, oh, let's throw on the season, and I kind of like a couple of years ago, I think right before New Blood, it was on TV, and I started watching it from like somewhere towards the end of season 2, and then watched that all the way to the end of season 8. I probably should do that again sometime soon, but with the channel, I've been trying to watch more new stuff. All that to say is I like rewatching Dexter even as a drama series, because this sounds weird to say, but it's kind of a comfort show, or like something I know the direction of now. So it's like I enjoy the characters, and I don't know, it's something good to have on the background also, just to be watching. So after New Blood came out, that ending did me so wrong. I kind of was like, I don't know if I can watch the original series anymore, because I haven't watched Game of Thrones, but I imagine I felt a lot of the ways that I've heard people felt with Game of Thrones, where it's like I watched 8 seasons of Dexter and now I'm torn. Like I can't enjoy it anymore. But time has progressed a little bit. Also, with the Resurrection coming out, I know they retconned that ending. You're not going to tell me that the intent wasn't to have what happened in New Blood happen. But I think because they are changing it, I have gotten a little softer to my thoughts of rewatching Dexter and appreciating the original series, despite how New Blood ended things. Honestly, I didn't hate New Blood for the most part. There were a lot of problems with it as far as like logic flaws. But like episode 9, I think, was like the highest rated episode in the entire season. Like it was peaking, and then episode 10 was like the lowest rated episode in the entire franchise. Like it was below, I think the end of season 8 in the original series of Dexter was like the previous low, and then New Blood surpassed that as being the lowest. So talk about from like such a high to such a collapse in the last 20 minutes, especially that show. Yeah, they're for sure telling you that. I mean, I think I've mentioned this before. Yeah, it worked. I did have a lot of problems with the whole M99 ketamine and like Angela being a super cop, but so I still had problems with New Blood prior to the last episode, but I was like, you know what? If we end things okay, honestly, I don't think I got the gist. A lot of people knew that New Blood was going to be just one season. I didn't think I picked up on that, because I'm like, New Blood, that means we're like starting a new thing, but they just made it one season, and then I was like, oh, I guess people knew that this was supposed to be just a one-off thing where it ended quickly. And then I read all the stuff afterwards about what they wanted to do as far as Michael C. Hall and Clyde Phillips just kind of wanting to end the character essentially in a way that they felt satisfied and happy about, as opposed to how they ended it the first time. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see how Resurrection is going to be. I enjoyed Original Sin, if you've watched my series on that, a lot more than I expected to. And hopefully Resurrection can kind of pick up on that and still be successful. And the other regular show was the same last time I rewatched, even at the end of the second to last one, I was like, this is still savable. Yeah, it felt like, I don't know. This is an example of, I talked about Breaking Bad in my honorable mentions as far as having how you end a show really well. The show did not take that note. And I'm pretty sure don't know if I mentioned this before, but I'm pretty sure Dexter, the original series, like season 8, ended at the same time that Breaking Bad ended. So it was such a weird, like, I think that's partially why I disliked it so much, is like we got Breaking Bad, which had a amazing ending as a show that I mostly liked. And then you had Dexter, the show that I like adored, and the way they ended it, I'm like, oh, that looks very bad. It's kind of like when a video game launches like the same time as some other great one, or some movie launches at the same time as some other one. It's like, you should have picked a different weekend because everyone's going to go see that, or everyone's going to compare you to that. And that probably didn't help how things ended. I really liked Original Sin. I'm more for, yeah, I'm hopeful for a second season of Original Sin. I kind of hope they don't spend too much time. I did a video on that too, my hopes for a second season, but I hope we don't do too much with Brian, because I thought it made sense. It was cool to do that. I didn't really fully expect it to be such a focal point of Original Sin. I thought it was going to be like, hey, Easter egg cameo. We'll see Brian. We'll see Miguel. We'll see characters as far as reference points. But I was surprised they included him as much as they did, because I'm like, why would he spend 10 years not talking to Dexter? Obviously, they kind of gave us a reason with Harry trying to convince him to leave. I know there's been speculation, people thinking that Brian may kill Harry. We'll see. I think it'd be kind of funny if like Harry's not dead and he just like left this whole time. And we see him like in Resurrection alive, but I don't think they'll do that. But I hope Brian isn't in Original Sin season 2 as much. I liked him as a character. Like, I thought he worked well. But as far as like continuity of storyline and having it make sense, I know we can kind of break stuff and just accept it being broken, but he's supposed to go off and get like a med degree to be like a surgeon or a doctor or whatever. So unless he like fakes that somehow, I don't like, he's got to be not part of Dexter's life. And you have to have some reason for him not to talk to Dexter, especially when Harry dies within the next year or whatever. Why would Brian not just go talk to Dexter? So you need to have some good reason for him to like now abandon ship and not be like fully there. I don't know. Maybe he'll kill Harry and he'll feel so guilty. Sorry, I'm probably moving the webcam. Maybe he'll kill Harry and feel so guilty, and that's why he just leaves. Who knows? But give me a good reason for him not to be around, and probably don't have him around, because the more you show him, the more it's like, why aren't you talking to Dexter? Like, you adore this guy so much and you're like stalking him, but you take so long to finally like meet up with him and talk to him. I don't know. So it worked well for season 1. Just they need to be careful, because I've talked about this with prequels before. I don't like prequels because we know where we wind up, so the surprise is a little bit lost with that. But the other problem you run into is, how do we get from, now that we've done Original Sin season 1, we have a starting point, and we have the original series like season 1. So we have kind of a guardrail of time, and we have to get there to there. And maybe we don't have to have like Original Sin end with season 1 of Dexter. We can have it only last like a few years, because you have like many years that you can just say passed. But you're now like locked into your time frame. The example I always think of is when you had like Star Wars come out, and you had episodes 4 through 6 come out first, and then you had 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then going into 3. I'm like, I mean, I don't know. People need to not be concerned probably too much with spoilers here, but if you haven't watched Star Wars, be concerned with that here. But we knew characters in episode 4 were there, and then we knew characters in episode 2 were there. So when there's a big fight between 2 main characters in episode 3, I'm like, we know neither of these characters die because they're in episode 4. So that's the problem with prequels, where you have like something then at the beginning, then something there at the end, where it's like the prequel now can't just go continually back in time because we've reached a starting point. I'm also curious how much they'll do flashbacks still in season 2. I feel like they still could do them quite a bit, but what would they be on? Like, especially because I don't know if they want to do the whole Vogel thing. You can just have Dexter like adjusting to life, but we kind of got that in the original series already. So yeah, so I've probably rambled on about Dexter enough, but it's obviously number 2 for a reason. If you asked me different points in time, maybe it would have been number 1, but for now we place it here at number 2. And hopefully, while it's a different series for me, hopefully Resurrection can live up to the hype and be a better experience than the New Blood. I have seen this time, at least finally, they have acknowledged Resurrection is intending to be multiple seasons, so we're obviously not going to have Dexter die for a third time in season 1, but I'm curious to see how they're going to make that story work, because he's committed so many crimes now. Like with the end of New Blood, you had him do things that were kind of unavoidable to like get out of. Like he was fine, and then he made some choices at the end of New Blood that I'm like, okay, now you're not fine. You can't really defend that. So it kind of has to only be on the run or like in a trial. So if they have some way of where he's like not doing either of those things, and I've seen stuff where he's like putting people on his table still, and I'm like, I don't know how you can do that and have like law enforcement like monitoring you so heavily in like New York City or wherever you're at now. So I don't know. I hope it doesn't get too crazy, because there's shows like You, for example, where the plot, like watching that show, I just had to be like, okay, I'm just like, accept anything can happen. Like the realm of reality is just not in existence watching You. That's why I was still pretty harsh on it, but season 5, when like crazy stuff would happen, I'm like, all right, you've established that there's like no rules as far as, you can do whatever and not get caught, or, that's probably a criticism I'll have more of that than Dexter. I feel like Dexter, yeah, maybe he should have gotten caught a little bit more, but I felt like it was a little more believable. Also, Dexter's more likable as a villain. I get that he's like doing bad things, but he's doing bad things in a way that makes us like appreciate him. Whereas something like You, it's like, I didn't like Joe Goldberg the entirety of You, and I realize you're probably not supposed to. I think I've heard Penn Badgley, I think is his name, talk about Joe, and you're not supposed to like him as a character. But then I'm like, then why am I watching? Like, I don't know. I get that like he's like despicable and you're not supposed to enjoy him, but I'm like, I feel like, but to have a character, even if he's a bad guy, you have to like have something that makes me like you, and that's why I keep watching. But You's definitely not a series I really highly thought of. Like obviously I didn't mention in my honorable mentions, but Dexter compared to Joe Goldberg is like night and day when it comes to how I view them as characters and how enjoyable they are to watch, because I don't know, Joe Goldberg didn't do it for me, unfortunately. So interesting show concept, but they just, I don't know, it got too crazy, and him as a character wasn't great. So I've talked about it a little bit in some videos in the past. So if you're interested in talking about You, look at my season rankings of that. And then also I just did a video covering season 5. So, all right. I know I've talked about Dexter long enough here, so we will jump on to number 1, which probably won't surprise people if you know stuff on the channel, but it may surprise people if you're not expecting it. We've obviously covered some animated stuff already, and I'll give a little tease with that, with Vox Machina and with Over the Garden Wall. So I'm not like closed off to saying that's not something I enjoy, and that's very much clear by my last one here with Dragon Ball Z. And this definitely fits in the category of my personal favorite, as opposed to being something I would say is like peak TV show. Although I think on IMDb, like the show as a whole has like a 9.0. So it does have a lot of great aspects of TV. Would I say universally it's like better than, like, I don't know, I imagine people really like The Wire or Sopranos or Breaking Bad. Obviously not. But for me personally, Dragon Ball Z is number 1 for me for a few reasons. And to clarify here, similar to Dexter, I'm viewing this as Dragon Ball Z specifically. I know it's kind of a continuation of Dragon Ball, the original story, when it comes to like the manga. But for the sake of like this conversation, I'm talking about Z specifically. So not including original Dragon Ball here, although I do enjoy it. Not including Super, although I do enjoy it. Not including GT. I know there's a lot of mixed opinions on that. And not including Daima, which I actually not even watched Daima, but I've heard pretty good things with that, so I probably should at some point. But Dragon Ball Z for a lot of reasons. I feel like it just hits a lot of marks for me. So if you're not aware of kind of the story, I'll give you a high level overview. If you're surprised to see like an anime here at the top of my list, as mentioned, with kind of stuff here on the channel though, you shouldn't be too surprised. If I throw, you can see the manga there, then obviously some collectibles there. But as far as like the subject matter, so it's an action adventure anime. So this was kind of my first introduction to anime, and I have heavy nostalgia here, so that's probably a big factor for me. So I've liked the show since I was a kid. So since I was, I don't know, however old I was, like 8 or something. So I've spent a lot of time with this show, and that carries a heavy weight for me, just heavy nostalgia for it. It was kind of my introduction to anime, although I watched this show originally, and I didn't really get into anime stuff until like, I don't know, I'm just roughly guessing like 5 to 7 years ago ish. I'm still not like super deep into a lot of the stuff, but I've gotten a little bit heavier into some of the content with that as far as that goes. So this was kind of my introduction to it, even though I didn't wind up exploring other stuff until way later on. If you're not familiar with the story, you have the story of Goku, obviously the prominent character here, and the rest of the Z Warriors, and they're pretty much their efforts to save Earth. So it's kind of your typical, I think it falls in the category of shonen. I'm not like an anime like subgenre expert, but it's very like action fighting based. So the original Dragon Ball was a lot more like story and comedy based. I think the original Dragon Ball was almost like a sitcom, whereas Z took a more serious tone. They still include some of that stuff, but it focused a little bit more on the action and kind of the combat side of things, and the progression of characters. But I just feel like the story here has so much depth to it, more than maybe what it like first appears. Like you just think of Dragon Ball Z, if you're not familiar with it, you're like, this is a dumb cartoon with people fighting with like zero substance to it. But there's a lot more than that if you actually watch it. And I realized if I was like ranking the best animes of all time, once again, if I'm being like best instead of my favorite, Dragon Ball Z is probably not the top. It's probably still really high, but it's probably, you know, there's other things people enjoy, whether it's like One Piece or Naruto or Bleach or like, I don't know, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, things along those lines that people probably view as better. Frieren, and a lot of people enjoy it, which I do like the manga. I've not really bought into the anime quite yet, but side tangent with that. It's definitely not necessarily what I would say people view as the best, but it's my favorite just because it has so many elements. It was one of the original ones for me. You have such a big story progression from like start to finish. So you begin things with the Saiyan saga with, I'll lightly touch on the story. I don't feel like there's necessarily too much spoilers. I mean, the picture I put up here kind of gives a lot of spoilers already, which this was just the first IMDb photo that I pulled. But you have things starting off with the Saiyan saga where you have Goku, this character from the original Dragon Ball that you've spent so much time with growing up, and he's kind of an adult now. He has a son named Gohan there, and he learns, I mean, do people care about spoilers with Dragon Ball Z? I don't feel like that's too much in depth, but he learns something unique about him as far as his upbringing, and someone comes to Earth. There's an alien race that comes to Earth, and they send somebody there, and he winds up fighting Goku, and we have like a lot of character development, like Piccolo, the green guy here, the Namekian, is somebody who was in the original series, and there's a lot of, I will say, they definitely do the like, you're the bad, they kind of what Cobra Kai does, where it's like, you're the bad guy. All right, we fought you. Now you're one of the good guys. Now we got to fight the next bad guy. So I feel like it works really well, and they kind of probably do it a little bit too much, but when they do it, I feel like it works effectively. Like you have Piccolo, who's originally a bad guy in the original series. For pretty much all of Z, he's a good guy. He's a little bit questionable at the first few episodes of Z, but him and Goku fight Raditz. They wind up ultimately, Goku actually winds up dying and going to the other world, but you have such like character progression here. All the bad guys are my best friends now. Yeah, it's like, all right, I beat you. Now join me. That's definitely like a little bit of how the story goes, but you have Goku, and there's also probably one other criticism I'll give with the show, where a lot of times you have, so Goku's the main character. He's not my favorite character. I've already talked about some of my favorite characters in a different video, so check that out if you're interested, but you have him as the main character, and because of that, a lot of the show's like, all right, Goku's off doing this other thing, or he's like recovering somewhere. And in the meantime, let's make these other characters important, and they're going to hold off the threat before he comes back and is the one that saves us all. So there is that aspect of it that gets a little bit of rinse and repeat where it's like, all right, let's have somebody else save the day. So I will admit to that a little bit, but you have in the Saiyan Saga, you have Vegeta and Raditz. So Vegeta, this guy on the left here, if you're not familiar with that, who's like kneeled down. And he's a Saiyan just like Goku. And he's the bad guy of that first saga. And they fight. Goku winds up sparing him. And then in the next saga, or next season, if you want to try to compare it to that, where they go to Namek, which is like the only time they're really not on Earth to, if you're not familiar with the subject matter, I'll probably try not to go too much in depth, but hopefully it's not super confusing. It's called Dragon Ball Z, mainly just because they added like a letter on to make it unique from Dragon Ball, but the Dragon Balls are these things you can make wishes with on Earth, and they are originated by this race called the Namekians. So they go to this other planet to get the Dragon Balls to make a wish because they want to wish their friends back who died in the fights of the first saga. But they do that. They go to Namek and they learn about Frieza, who's like this guy in the background here in this big picture. And there's a lot of character development there where Vegeta probably has the most character development in the entire show. The guy, as I said, kneeling down if you're not familiar, but he turns from like full villain in the first season to being like halfway in between. Namek's kind of fun because you have like different factions. It's kind of like in Stranger Things where I mentioned where there's like different groups doing stuff, except in this instance, there's like different groups fighting each other. You have like Frieza's team, then you have Vegeta, then you have like the Earthlings. So it's kind of fun having like the different groups all trying to like navigate around each other. Obviously, Goku ends up showing up and helping things out too. Obviously, we get like the Super Saiyan stuff that we see here. And I just feel like they just are able to do so many different stories effectively. Like after that, then we have the Android and Cell saga where we have this extra twist where we have Vegeta's son come into play. And I did a video on this a long time ago, but the Cell saga very much like correlates if you've watched the Terminator franchise, like Terminator 1 and 2, especially 2, I feel like. So much of it like overlaps as far as story goes. We have like someone traveling back in time to change the past for the future, and that whole kind of plot point there. And I think it works well with like this sci-fi mystery, also like understanding what's going on here. Like, wait, did somebody else go back in time with my time machine and stuff like that? So there's a lot of development there. Also, I think I did a short on this one ranking my favorite sagas, but the Cell saga, you have Gohan, who's my favorite character, actually become like prominent. I've heard stuff of Akira Toriyama, like the creator, was intending to have Gohan be like the hero after that saga, but then he realized everybody loved Goku, so he kind of like changed his mind with that. But he's like the surprise, like real value of the Cell saga, and that's probably one of the cooler parts of TV for me. Then we have the Buu saga. It gets a little bit silly there with a lot of stuff that takes place with like fusing and like being absorbed by Buu and all that kind of stuff. But I think it still ends strong, and there's a lot of good quotes in that one as well. So I just feel like from start to finish, it's such a cohesive story. You have a mix of like a lot of different character development with this, with people turning from bad to good, or people, you know, realizing their true potential. Honestly, I feel like if you're like working out and you just like listen to like an AMV of DBZ, like it's such a good motivator. As I said, it's kind of stood the test of time from being something I watched a long time ago and still really enjoy. And they're obviously continuing to expand on it with different like side series from there. They kind of have the problem that I mentioned with Dexter though, where it's like there's a time skip at the end of Z, and then Super takes place between that, and then Daima also takes place between that. Obviously GT's like not canon or whatever, but with the stories they're continuing on, they're kind of running out of runway as far as to make things cohesively make sense. But I don't know how much they really care about having a complete package anyway. But yeah, overall, I feel like it just hits so many points for me. Obviously, there's a lot of filler in the show if you watch the original show, and then there's so many versions of things when it comes to, oh, here's I'm going to watch this dubbed or subbed, or here's the Ocean dub, or here's the Funimation dub. So not that this means anything to a lot of people, but I watched the Ocean dub all the way up through Namek. And I feel like the voice actors I like recognize in that capacity, like that's young Vegeta's voice. And then Funimation dub after that with different voice actors where it's like, okay, this is adult Vegeta or more mature, good Vegeta. So there's so many different ways to watch it. There's also like Kai, who's like more of the abridged version without the filler that like more so matches the manga. Yeah, who needs time continuity? I don't know. I feel like in some ways a lot of people probably don't care about that when they're watching the show, but I hope that it doesn't like just go off the rails with like not fully making sense. But yeah, as I said, maybe people weren't expecting me to include anime in this list necessarily, but I can't imagine people are too surprised with me talking about this given all the stuff I've done here on the channel with it. But it just feels like a complete package of like different types of characters. Like Goku's obviously the main guy throughout. He doesn't have too many layers, but he's constantly training. You have Gohan, who's like only fighting when he needs to. You have Vegeta, who's like stubborn and always wants to be the best, but he's always kind of number 2. Piccolo has like a big change that takes place and where he kind of befriends Gohan and stuff like that. So there's just a lot of character development and story progression that I really enjoy. I don't think this is something that they can really ever do in live action. We obviously had Dragon Ball Evolution, which was a train wreck. I think that's still like one of the lowest rated IMDb movies of all time. But obviously they've done stuff like One Piece, the live action, which I thought about including in my honorable mentions because I did enjoy it. I know a lot of people didn't like it that much, but I thought they handled that well. I don't think Dragon Ball is really something you can do in live action because it's like you have so many people flying around and like powering up and blasting beams. It's hard to look like real, and their hair is kind of goofy. So like, how's that going to look normal? Even if you go to like conventions, it's hard to be like, okay, that looks kind of goofy as far as the hair. My disbelief is suspended enough time that doesn't matter. I'm not one to let detail get in the way of a good story. Yeah, if you like, as I mentioned with you, it kind of depends on what you're watching. If you're just like, all right, we've done this so many times, I don't feel like this has to be realistic anymore. But there's sometimes where I'm like, I kind of want it to be more grounded. But yeah, I feel like just the show across the board hammers on so many different things. There are like comedic episodes if you like that with a lot of the filler, especially like when Goku and Piccolo learn to get their driver's licenses. And there's a sci-fi element to the Cell Saga. It's just a lot of like overcoming things, and a lot of it's kind of cheesy, I guess. But as I mentioned, a lot of it just kind of feels like it's a feel-good motivational story with cooler elements. The villain designs are awesome, whether it's Frieza or Cell or Boo or the Ginyu Force or any of those like Dabura or any of the side kind of sub-villains. So I feel like they've mastered that well, and we'll see kind of the direction of things going forward. Obviously, Akira Toriyama passed away, but we have Toyotaru kind of taking the mantle. I don't know if we'll continue with Super. Honestly, the show for Super needs to catch up to the manga still. There's like a lot of stuff they haven't done there, but I'll probably watch Daima at some point, but I think on Netflix it didn't have the dub. I'm probably like the blasphemous person, so if you're like an anime purist, I watched DBZ growing up in with the subs, so that's how I watch it because that's how I'm familiar with it. Like Chris Sabat, Sean Schemmel, those kind of people as far as the voice actors go. That's kind of how I've been used to it. Also, that's kind of the hard part with watching anime anyway. If you're watching with dubs, you can't be doing anything else. Like you have to be like watching the screen at all times. If you look away, you're not gonna understand what they're saying. So in some aspects, I kind of like prefer that anyway, even though it's not necessarily the authentic way to watch it. But yeah, that's just kind of overall. I could probably go on much longer as far as DBZ goes when it comes to like the importance. And while it may not, as I said, be the best of all time, I think its impact on these other franchises that came afterwards is very clear. And for me personally, it's definitely a favorite and something I'll probably always go back to, and has such a longevity with me at this point in time. So that kind of covers my list. I know we kind of covered a wide range of stuff. If you want to recap it, I'll kind of run back through it as far as my top 10 goes. I obviously covered the honorable mentions, but we had a good variety. At number 10, we have Freaks and Geeks. Obviously, your kind of sitcom, little comedy, coming of age story. King of Queens, another sitcom, more just pure comedy, not much coming of age. It's more of like adulthood and dealing with that kind of life. Cobra Kai, more of your drama and a little bit of action, but with a little bit of a progression of character development with Johnny and those folks. How I Met Your Mother. We have a lot of like sitcoms, at least on the back half of this, I feel like. Just kind of a feel-good throw it on, not much depth. It's kind of a turn your brain off that you can probably do, similar to King of Queens. Stranger Things, enjoyable story, plot development, another coming of age with a sci-fi horror element included with it, and the 80s aesthetic is awesome. Over the Garden Wall, this one's probably under the radar for a lot of people and surprising to be on this list, but it's kind of a short mini-series, Halloween themed. Definitely check it out. Good voice acting. Very funny, I'll say, with a lot of great one-liners. Legend of Vox Machina, this is probably another surprise for some people, but a lot of good dialogue here. Obviously, these people are voice actors by like profession, so it was very easy for them to be like good at doing that job here, and it's kind of a good blend of action and comedy. The Office, top sitcom for me here, so just good story mixed with some good comedy, and character development here is pretty strong as well, similar to like Cobra Kai and a few of the other ones I mentioned, just with the characters' progressions from start to finish and just seeing them change with their friendships over time. Dexter, incredible drama series. Probably one of the few shows, I feel like too many shows try to make a bad guy likable. I don't think a lot of them hit the mark with it, and Dexter is the one that worked for me as far as I enjoy this character and I'm rooting for him more often than not. And then finally, wrapping things back up at DBZ. So the only anime inclusion I had here, and I just feel like it's kind of like the whole package of like action, adventure, and a great story to go along with it. They kind of, similar to, I don't know, things like Cobra Kai or what are the other ones I mentioned. It kind of gets to a point where I think this show kind of gets held back by a little bit by power scaling. Like obviously each time we advance the story, somebody's got to be stronger than the last guy, so they kind of run into that problem, and it turns into somewhat of the Saiyan show where it's like, okay, if you're not a Saiyan, you can't really keep up because their like bodies get stronger whenever they've like recovered from a fight. So a lot of the characters kind of get left in the dust, so that's kind of a downside, but I think it still has great character development and a good story overall and from start to finish. So as I said, that wraps up the list, so I probably won't hang out too much longer here, but appreciate anyone watching the VOD back. I know JDev, you popped in for a bit. Lex, appreciate you being here and being supportive. But other than that, as I mentioned before, if you want to share your list down in the comments after the stream's been posted, would love to engage with people's thoughts there. And once again, this is my favorites. It's not necessarily the best. If I was going for like the best, I would probably put the stereotypical Breaking Bad and all that kind of stuff. But these are ones I enjoy watching, and I think pretty much all of these, let me go back through. I think all of these I could like rewatch and enjoy. So there's not necessarily anything here. Yeah. A lot of times it's hard when there's a show when you watch it once. I mentioned that with Dexter. A lot of times like drama series, it's like, I've seen it already. I don't need to watch it again. But I think everything in my top 10 here, if you said like on any given day, let's watch an episode of this, I would not turn it down. It's something I would be like, yeah, let's rewatch it. So that's a big factor for me. Also, just the rewatchability factor of it, whether I have to be like invested in it or just have it on the background, they all really work effectively at that. So as I said, that's my list. Let me know your guys if you have any thoughts here. And as I mentioned too, I did the poll for this as far as having this be the topic here. I'll probably do more gaming stuff in the future as well, but based off the feedback, maybe I'll do movies next as far as a top 10 list. And then I think video games was next after that as far as getting any votes. I'll probably still do music at some point. I don't think anyone voted for that one, but while it may not be something that's very covered here on the channel, it's something I'm passionate about, so I'll probably do albums at some point. Well, I'm not really a big album guy, though. I feel like I know more songs and artist stuff than albums, but I could probably still pick like 10 albums that I definitely feel like I like all, like most, if not all of the songs on. So, and maybe at some point I'll expand on that and do like top 10 artists or top 10 songs. There's a lot you can do with definitely music. You can do that, I guess, also with shows and stuff like top 10 sitcoms or top 10 anime. Granted, some of this may be spoiled by this list, but there's different subversions of this stuff you can definitely do. So I probably rambled on long enough, but appreciate everyone for being here. Let me pop that off. About more center now. As far as future stuff here on the channel, I'll probably wind up doing Final Destination. I'm honestly a little bit mixed on it. I've seen mostly good reviews, but I don't know. I've seen some like trailers where there's like an MRI scene where I'm like, for me personally, it hits a little home with, I don't know if I really want to watch that stuff, but I'll probably still wind up going to see it. We'll see for sure, though. I'll let you guys know if that's something I'll wind up going to check out and reviewing. And beyond that, The Last of Us, we have a couple episodes left of that. And then I mentioned this in a post, but going to Texas Frightmare next weekend. So looking forward to that. First time doing that. So hopefully it winds up being a good experience. I'm not sure if I'll do like any of the celebrity stuff or not, but either way, I'll probably wind up doing some kind of vlog where I'm just having some kind of footage, at least showing it off and how my thoughts were on the experience as a whole was. I'm just going on Sunday, so that may limit some of the opportunities. Like I know a lot of stuff people typically go on like Saturdays, but those are typically the most crowded days, even though they have the most going on. So hopefully Sunday winds up being just as good as far as how that goes. But yeah, I'll probably do some kind of vlog video on that experience, and hopefully winds up being a good time, and we'll see what all we wind up doing there. So I know there's a couple panels, and obviously I'll cover some of the booths or check out some of the swag. So that's kind of plans for the immediate future. Yeah, appreciate anyone watching the video back, and I think this was a good kind of viewpoint of doing this in a live stream. As I mentioned, I thought about doing this in a video, but live kind of made it more casual and easier to just talk about in depth for a long amount of time. We've been streaming for a couple hours. So other than that, appreciate everyone being here, and I hope you have a great weekend, and yeah, just have a good time. Thanks. Take care, guys.